All right, we're winding down to the end of the notes, the end of the unit, the end of the year. We've got range of tolerance and biomes. We'll talk about range of tolerance today, and we'll talk about biomes 1 or 2 days next week, and then that will be all for the Zoom lessons. Still have ample quizzes and worksheets to keep reviewing it and make sure, hopefully, that something gets learned. And if you are interested in all in an optional study for test, let me know. Already had one person mention they'd like to. So let's see, admit. Range of tolerance. Range of tolerance is a concept that is, at least in its broadest principle, self-explanatory in the name. So tolerance is what you can tolerate. And we're not talking about annoying people or things like that. You have to tolerate annoying people because you can't seem to get rid of them. Plus, I am one of them, apparently. So we're not talking about annoying people. We're talking about abiotic and biotic factors in an ecosystem. For example, abiotic factors. What's the maximum amount of water a plant can handle? What's the least amount of water a plant can handle? You know, what's the level at so much water the plant drowns, or so little water that the plant withers away and dies? Or heat. What's the temperature range at which a plant grows best? And what's the hottest temperature that it can still grow? And what's the coldest temperature that it can still grow? And I'm not talking about going dormant for the winter. I'm talking about dying. It could be a biotic factor. What is the maximum amount of predators that it can handle before it becomes extinct? Or what are so few predators that it becomes overabundant and kills out its food source? So range of tolerance is that range, you know, like maybe we could say at this is the minimum and the thing dies. I'd try and draw a skull, but I'm terrible at skeletons. And then over here, we've got the maximum. And when you get past the maximum, the thing dies. So that's the range of tolerance. Somewhere, not necessarily dead center, but somewhere in there is going to be an ideal range. And it turns out that most living things don't get to live at their ideal range. But there is in here someplace another range from here to here, let's say, that might be their optimum range. And organisms prefer, I guess plants definitely don't think about it, and animals probably don't think about it consciously, but things prefer to be in their optimum range. So, range of tolerance, several factors. Definition. The variation or the amount of variation in some factor that an organism, shouldn't be an S there, an organisms, that an organism can live with. So ferns, why do ferns pretty much only grow in shady and semi-shady areas? Well, it's because most ferns cannot take too much sun. They can't take full intense sun. Why is it that corn plants don't do very well under trees? It's because corn plants don't do well with too little sun. And by the way, you could have too little sun for fern too, so that it died out. But that range, and it varies for everything. So it's not like one range of tolerance fits all. Cactus do better on the drier end of the spectrum. You put most cactus in a wet area, drowned out. Most people who buy potted cactuses, cacti, whatever, for their room or window or whatever, kind of tend to kill them by overwatering them. A cactus in a pot you can water probably about once every month or 2 or 3. Every organism has its own range of tolerance, varies from organism to organism to organism. So the optimal range is the range, the variation in which the organism performs the best. As I had showed you on this last slide, there is the range of what they can live in, and then there is the range in which they perform the best. So maybe you've seen, if you've paid attention at all, maybe you're driving through the country and you see the cornfield, and the corn is all tall. Maybe July, late July, August, September, the corn is all tall. And then you drive past a tree on the edge of the cornfield, and as you start getting close to the tree, the corn gets shorter and shorter until underneath the tree, it might be only 6 or 8 inch tall plants, while the other plants are maybe 6 feet tall. Well, that particular corn is way out of its in that particular case, the field, the corn is in its optimum range for light, but under the tree, the corn is down here getting close to the minimum it can even live in. And it turns out that for corn, by the way, because every organism is different, it turns out that for corn, optimum would be someplace here. It would not even be close to the center. The optimum range for corn would be close to maximum sun. Corn plants are designed for hot, sunny, humid weather. I mean, corn plants do best in the kind of weather that we can hardly tolerate and are heading as soon as possible for the air conditioner. So the optimum range, variation in which organisms perform the best, and it varies from organism to organism. If one factor is out of the optimum range, the range of tolerance for all other factors shrinks. So let's say this is the range of tolerance for sun, for a plant X. I don't know what plant. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's say for a fern plant. For corn, the optimum range was way up here towards max amount of sun. For fern, the optimum range might be here, close to the minimum amount of sun. This is for a fern. Now, if that fern is in a sunny place and that fern actually is trying to live here, it may still be able to live, but let's say its tolerance for water. Now, you're going to have to follow me. I looked for pictures. I couldn't find any good pictures to illustrate this. So let's say that this is the light range of tolerance for a fern. And let's say that this is the moisture range of tolerance for a fern. So if the fern is trying to live here in its range of tolerance, but outside of its optimal range, it's not going to be able to tolerate this broader variation in moisture. If it has to live here, let's see, I'm going to change colors. If it has to live here, outside of its optimum range, then the range of tolerance for moisture will shrink. And it won't be able to handle what it used to be able to handle if light was in its optimum range. So if one factor is out of the optimum range, like let's say light, the range of tolerance for other factors, like let's say moisture, will shrink. It turns out, by the way, that the range of tolerance for all factors are actually what determines what niche an organism will occupy in its habitat. If it can't tolerate sun, it will be in a shade, and that will determine its niche or have a strong influence on its niche. If it can't live in the shade, it'll have to live out in sunnier areas. That'll have a strong influence on its niche. And it turns out that organisms that have broad range of tolerance for most factors are abundant and live everywhere. So, you know, dandelions in the plant world, most things we call weeds. The definition of weed is, I don't know, I've heard different ways to define it. And somebody said a weed is growing any place you don't want it, which is kind of true. If you plant a field of beans and some corn, if you plant a field of corn and corn comes up, that's what you want. Yay. If you plant a field of soybeans and corn comes up here and there, you spray the corn or pull the corn to kill it because it has become a weed when it's in the bean field. But things that we normally consider to be weeds, like dandelions. Dandelions have a broad range of tolerance for just about everything. They can take it when it's too dry for other plants. They can live when it's too wet for other plants. They can live in the full sun. They can live in semi-sun. They can live with poor soil. They can live in rich soil. They have a broad range of tolerance for everything, so they have a wide distribution. Opossums or possums or whatever you want to call them have a broad range of tolerance for almost every factor. So they live almost over the entire, all of the entire North American continent. Invasive species. There's all kinds of invasive species. Plants, animals, insects, of course insects would be animals, birds. One thing that makes most invasive species invasive, able to take over ecosystems, is broad range of tolerance. Another thing that helps a lot and probably is necessary is no natural disease or predator. All right, anyway, if one factor is out of the optimum range, the range of tolerances for the other factors, whatever they may be, will shrink, like light and moisture, as we showed. Okay, reproduction is the most critical time. That is for range of tolerances. So when we say reproduction, okay, a little bit awkward. When we say reproduction, we don't mean sex. We mean the whole entire process of producing offspring, raising, if you're a bird, growing the eggs, because eggs are like almost, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but eggs are almost pure energy or very, very intense energy. That's why we eat them. They've got all the nutrients that the developing chick would need. So they've got a lot of energy. And that takes a lot of energy for the hen to grow those eggs in her body. In a mammal, a fetus is Latin for baby. Fetus does not mean it's not a person. It means it is a person. So the fetus growing inside a mammal takes a lot of energy to produce that. That's why mothers are all of the sudden, pregnant mothers are all of the sudden so motivated to eat so much, because it takes a lot of energy. Are they eating more than they need to grow the baby? Yes. But that's because in the case of mammals, nursing the baby takes lots of energy. And, you know, in our day and age, we didn't have to worry about that. But in earlier days, you were never sure where your next meal was coming from. So pregnant mothers would eat and eat and eat and eat and eat to build up energy stores. We call it fat. So that if they ran out of food when the baby was nursing, they would still have energy to produce the milk to feed the baby. So reproduction, raising young, especially during the nursing period in mammals, developing young, pregnancies, and eggs take a huge amount of energy. So they are the most critical time for ranges of tolerance to be as close as possible to the optimum range. That's one of the reasons probably why so many organisms have their young in the spring, because the spring is when everything's growing and there's usually all kinds of food available. A limiting factor is any factor that is not in its optimum range and therefore is limiting the well-being of a population. Now, by well-being, we mean how well that population thrives. We don't mean whether it feels sad about itself. We mean, are the members of that population able to grow vigorously and be healthy and produce a good, strong next generation? So anything, for example, why don't corn plants grow in the trees, in the forest? What's the limiting factor in the forest? Primarily light. Not enough light, corn can't grow there. Light is the limiting factor. I've got a potted plant hanging in my living room called, well, can't think what that one's called. That's terrible. I used to have a plant called pothos, which is a vine that does all right in shady areas. It's used to growing in its native environment in forests. If you put it in direct sunlight, it dies. In that case, sun is still a limiting factor, but it's limiting in the other direction. Cactus. Why don't cactus grow in Michigan? By the way, I think, if I remember right, there is 1 or 2 species of cactus that are native to Michigan, but you almost never see them. Why do they mostly like deserts? Because of the dryness of the desert. Abundance of water is a limiting factor for most cactus, whereas too little water is a limiting factor for other things. Anything that affects the population can be a limiting factor. Territory can be a limiting factor. If there's, we have bluebirds around here, and every bluebird wants a certain amount of territory, and it will drive out any other bluebird that tries to build a nest in that territory. So if there's more bluebirds than there are territory, that limits the population of bluebirds. So that's limiting factors. And that's as far as I'm going to go today. So make sure you take the quiz. And next week we will finish up over a couple of days, however long it takes, with biomes. So have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.